The funeral ended, but the real heartbreak began after everyone else drove away. I never imagined that the woman I had once promised forever would leave this world before 40. Nor did I expect that the last person still sitting in that empty house would be her younger sister, curled up on the living room floor, too exhausted to cry anymore. When I gently lifted her into my arms and carried her to bed, I thought I was simply showing kindness. I had no idea that when she woke up hours later, she would still be holding my hand, as though it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Before we continue, if you believe kindness still matters, that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that may need them today. My name is Nathan, and this happened in a quiet neighborhood outside Asheville, North Carolina. 5 years earlier, my marriage to my ex-wife, Rachel, had quietly collapsed. There had been no betrayal, no screaming matches, no courtroom drama. Life simply wore us down. Endless work, failed attempts to have children, financial stress, and too many nights where silence replaced conversation. Eventually, we signed the papers with tears instead of anger, and promised we would never become enemies. We kept that promise, although our lives slowly drifted apart. When I heard Rachel had died unexpectedly after a sudden brain aneurysm, I felt something inside me crack that I thought had healed years before. Grief doesn't care whether love still exists on paper. Sometimes it simply remembers what your heart once called home. The funeral was crowded with relatives, co-workers, neighbors, and old friends. Everyone shared stories about Rachel's generosity, her laughter, and the way she always remembered birthdays. Yet, as the afternoon faded, everyone returned to their own lives. The flowers remained, the silence remained, and so did Rachel's younger sister, Sarah. Sarah had spent nearly a week arranging every detail of the funeral, while barely sleeping. She welcomed guests, comforted relatives, signed paperwork, answered endless phone calls, and somehow never allowed herself a moment to collapse. By evening, she could barely keep her eyes open. I offered to help clean the house before leaving. She nodded, without saying much. An hour later, I found her asleep on the hardwood floor beside the sofa, still wearing the black dress from the funeral, clutching an old family photograph against her chest. She looked so completely drained that waking her felt almost cruel, so I carefully slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and another beneath her knees. She stirred only slightly as I carried her upstairs into the guest bedroom. I placed her gently beneath a blanket and turned to leave. Then her fingers wrapped tightly around my hand. Even asleep, she refused to let go. For a long moment, I simply stood there, unsure whether she even knew I was beside her. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of rain beginning outside. Hours later, when she finally opened her eyes, tears filled them instantly. She didn't panic. She didn't ask why I was there. Instead, she whispered that she hadn't wanted to wake up alone in the same house, where her sister would never walk through the door again. Those words stayed with me. Over the next several days, I helped sort through Rachel's belongings. Every sweater, every handwritten recipe, every old photograph became another reminder that life can disappear without warning. Sarah and I laughed through tears while discovering embarrassing high school pictures and childhood letters Rachel had carefully saved for decades. Grief has a strange way of introducing people to one another all over again. Although Sarah had been part of my family for nearly 10 years, I realized I had never truly known her. I discovered she volunteered at an animal shelter every weekend. She secretly paid utility bills for struggling elderly neighbors. She baked bread every Sunday because it reminded her of their late grandmother. She carried quiet burdens without asking anyone to notice. One afternoon, we found an old shoebox hidden inside Rachel's closet. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters. Some were addressed to me. Rachel had never mailed them. In those letters, she admitted she never blamed me for our divorce. She confessed that she had always hoped we would both find happiness, even if it wasn't together. She thanked me for loving her during the hardest years of her life, and apologized for believing that failure meant love had ended. Reading those pages felt like hearing her voice one last time. Neither Sarah nor I could stop crying. Instead of reopening old wounds, the letters somehow stitched together pieces that had remained broken for years. Weeks turned into months. I continued checking on Sarah after work. At first it was practical. The house needed repairs. Bills needed organizing. The lawn needed mowing. Eventually, though, our conversations lasted longer than the chores. We talked about fear, about loneliness, about the strange guilt that follows losing someone you loved. Neither of us was trying to replace Rachel. In truth, she remained part of every conversation. One autumn evening, Sarah confessed something that surprised me. She said, watching me care for Rachel after the divorce had changed how she viewed forgiveness. Most people walked away from former spouses forever. Yet I had shown up at the hospital, arranged paperwork, spoken at the funeral, and stayed when everyone else disappeared. I didn't feel heroic. I simply couldn't abandon someone who had once been family. The following spring, Sarah organized a charity fundraiser in Rachel's memory to support families facing unexpected medical emergencies. Nearly the entire community attended. Old friends, neighbors, and even strangers donated far more than anyone expected. Standing beside the memorial garden dedicated to Rachel, I realized something beautiful. Love hadn't ended with death. It had simply changed its shape. Rachel's kindness was now flowing through dozens of people helping one another. Months later, Sarah and I visited the cemetery carrying fresh white lilies. We sat quietly for nearly an hour, speaking more with our hearts than our voices. As we prepared to leave, Sarah reached for my hand. This time, she wasn't holding on because she was broken. She was holding on because she finally believed tomorrow could still be beautiful. Life doesn't always give us the ending we imagined. Sometimes it takes away the people we expected to grow old beside. Sometimes it leaves us carrying grief, so heavy, we believe we'll never stand again. But healing often begins with the smallest act of compassion. A hand offered without expectation. A quiet presence beside someone else's pain. A decision to stay when walking away would be easier. Years later, whenever people asked how Sarah and I became such close friends, we never started with the funeral. We started with kindness. Because sometimes, the moment that changes your life forever isn't a grand declaration or dramatic miracle. Sometimes, it's simply refusing to let another human being face the darkest night of their life alone. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, subscribe to the channel, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. Your support encourages more stories that remind us hope is never truly lost. Before you go, please leave a comment with the words, "Kindness always finds a way." We'd love to know you're watching with us. Rachel's life ended far too soon, but the love she planted in the hearts of others continued to bloom long after the flowers on her grave had faded. And every time I remember that quiet evening when Sarah woke up still holding my hand, I'm reminded that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall apart. They're the ones who find the courage to hold someone else's hand while learning how to heal their own hearts.